The room was cold, metal walls echoing with voices that didn't care. Bright lights shone down on a platform where forgotten lives were sold like broken machines. It was the last auction of the day, and no one looked excited anymore. Buyers were tired, bored, cruel, sitting in chairs with numbers, waving hands only when they saw something useful. In the middle of that stage stood an alien widow, her back straight but her eyes tired. She was tall, with deep violet skin, scars across her arms, and two short horns cracked at the tip. Her clothes were torn, her head was bowed, but beside her, holding tightly to her hand, was her little girl, small, shaking, and silent. The auctioneer shouted, "Next item female, used, survived war zone." One child included, no known diseases, no one moved, no hands lifted. Starting price to 20 credits, the auctioneer barked, still silence. Someone in the crowd laughed. "She's not worth 5 credits. Another voice shouted, "Too old, too broken, get to the next one." The widow didn't cry, not in front of them. She squeezed her daughter's hand, whispering softly in her native tongue, "Stay strong, little one, even if no one wants us." The child looked up at her mother, confused. "Mama, why are they laughing at us?" The widow bent low and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Because they don't understand what love is." From the far end of the hall, one man stood quietly in the shadows, a human, tall, bearded, wrapped in a worn brown coat, arms crossed, eyes steady. He had not moved once during the auction, not for any of the other beings sold before. But now, his eyes didn't leave the widow's face. She noticed him just for a second, and in that second, something passed between them. Not words, not hope, but recognition, like two ghosts who had seen the same fire. 10 credits. The auctioneer shouted, trying again, "Come on, someone must want a strong-bodied female. Throw in the child for free." More laughter, louder now, crueler. The widow turned her face slightly away. Cheeks burning, her daughter started to cry, but no sound came, only tears falling. The auctioneer looked angry now, tapping his datapad. 5 credits. "She can clean, cook, maybe still breed. Who's taking her?" "Burn her for heat." Someone joked from the back. Another laughed. "Not even good for that." That was when the man stepped forward, one boot after another, echoing on the metal floor. Quiet, calm. Everyone turned to look, even the widow. Unsure if this was just another insult, but he didn't speak nonsense. Didn't laugh, didn't ask questions. He stopped in front of the auction block and looked the widow straight in the eyes. "I'll take them," he said, voice calm, but strong. The auctioneer blinked. "Both?" "Yes," the man replied, pulling out a few worn credit chips. No need for more bidding. People whispered in the crowd. "Is he serious? What's wrong with him? She's trash. That kid's probably half dead." But the man didn't care. He walked up to the platform, stepped past the guard, and offered his hand to the widow. She hesitated, unsure, her fingers trembling. But then her daughter looked up at the man with wide, curious eyes, and slowly the widow reached out. When their hands touched, her shoulders dropped a little, just a little. He led them away, quiet as the air, and the auctioneer stared after them, confused. "That's a first," he muttered. Outside the auction hall, the wind was colder than ever. The widow pulled her daughter close, but didn't let go of the man's hand. She didn't know who he was or why he had chosen them, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. He didn't speak much on the walk, only gave them his coat and pointed to a small ship parked in the shadows. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was warm. He opened the hatch and said, "You can rest now." The widow looked around, confused. You don't want anything from us." The man shook his head. "I just couldn't leave you there." She sat down slowly, still holding her daughter, the warmth of the small room wrapped around her like a forgotten memory. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, In a quiet ship, far from cruel voices, someone had chosen her. Not for her value, not for her body, but because she was a person, and for the first time in her life. She felt it. She was no longer nothing. The ship moved slowly through the dark sky, its old engines humming like a quiet lullaby. Inside, the widow sat beside her daughter. Wrapped in a soft blanket the man had given them, the child was fast asleep, curled up on the bench, safe for the first time in months. The widow, however, couldn't sleep. Her eyes stayed on the man, the one who bought them, yet asked for nothing. He was in the front of the ship, pressing buttons, reading screens, calm and quiet. No badge, no uniform, no army mark, just a plain coat, boots with dirt from many worlds, and a face carved by time. She watched him, confused, afraid, and curious. "Who are you?" she asked softly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. He didn't turn around, didn't look back, but replied, "Doesn't matter." "Yes, it does," she said, sitting up straighter. "You saved us." "You didn't have to." The ship dipped slightly as he adjusted the course. "I've been to enough places to know pain when I see it," he said. "That's all. No name." She asked, blinking. "No rank." He turned just a little and gave a tired smile. "I had a name once, gave it up after the war." She stared at him for a long second, then looked away. Her heart was beating too fast, too loud. Something about this man made her feel both nervous and calm, a strange mix she hadn't felt in years. "Why did you buy us?" she finally asked. "You don't know me. You don't even know my species." He looked her in the eyes now, really looked, and said, "I didn't buy you. I rescued you." Her chest tightened. "Same thing, isn't it?" "We were on a platform. For sale." His voice was gentle but firm. "Maybe to them, yes, but not to me." She stood up slowly, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself, and walked toward him. "I don't understand you," she said. "Humans? They're not known for kindness." He chuckled. "And neither are your kind." But here we are. Silence settled between them, heavy but not cruel. She leaned against the side wall, looking out at the stars. "I lost everything in the war. My husband, my village, my people." He nodded, not asking for more, just listening. "My child hasn't eaten properly in days," she added, her voice trembling. "She cries in her sleep." "There's food in the back room," he said. "I packed it for emergencies." "Why are we your emergency?" she asked, staring at him. He took a deep breath, eyes tired. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind." The widow said nothing, but something in her chest started to crack. Not in pain, in relief. He didn't ask her for her name, didn't ask for payment, didn't ask her to work. He only offered warmth, food, silence, and space. Later that night, the ship landed in a small green valley, hidden between giant rocks. It wasn't a city or a station, just a shelter made of scrap metal, solar panels, and peace. The man opened the doors and said, "You can stay here as long as you need." The widow looked around, birds flying overhead, a small water stream, flowers, and even a little garden. "You live here alone?" she asked, amazed. He nodded. Most of the time, she stepped out carefully. Her daughter now awake and holding her hand, the little girl smiled for the first time in days. "Mama, it smells like fruit." The man smiled too. "There are berries. You can eat them inside the shelter." Everything was simple but clean. 2 rooms, a kitchen, and warm blankets. The widow sat on a chair, still unsure, still watching. "You're not going to lock the door behind us?" she asked. He shook his head. "You're not prisoners. You're guests, Uncle." Her hands tightened on the cup of warm tea he had given her. She whispered, "You could have taken us anywhere. Sold us again. Used us." He sat down across from her and said, I didn't take you for what you could give me. Then why? She asked again, her voice now desperate. Why us? He leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. Because someone once saved me when I was worthless. Just like you think you are now. The widow's lips parted slightly, her eyes wide, and they told me this, he continued. Kindness is the only thing that keeps the universe from falling apart. The room went quiet again. The child yawned. Curling up on the blanket on the floor, the widow looked down at her hands, once tied. Once bruised, now clean. Maybe this man with no name had more heart than the entire galaxy. And for the first time, she whispered her name. My name is Celiara. He smiled gently. Nice to meet you, Celiara. In the silence that followed, something unspoken bloomed. Between them, not love, not yet, but something even stronger. Trust. The stars were quiet that night, above the little shelter hidden in the rocks. The sky stretched wide, filled with 1,000 cold lights, but inside, the air was warm, the walls still. And the fire in the corner flickered softly. Celiara sat on the edge of the small sleeping mat, watching her daughter sleep. The girl had a full belly, a warm blanket, and a peaceful smile. It should have been enough to calm her mother's heart. But it wasn't. She touched the girl's cheek gently, brushing away a small tear from a fading dream. Then she stood up, walked to the kitchen, and stood in silence, her arms folded tightly over her chest. That's when it started, the shaking. Deep in her bones, the kind that doesn't come from cold, but from memories. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, the past whispered through her mind. She remembered the camps, the cages, the looks of hunger and hate. She remembered her mate, how he had tried to shield her, and the baby when the soldiers came. She remembered the fire, the chains, the sounds of screaming. And worst of all, she remembered the silence afterward. The days when she was just empty. Her knees gave way, and she sat on the floor, head in her hands. Tears slipped down her cheeks quietly, not like sobs, but like broken raindrops. She had held it all in for too long. Even after being rescued, she still felt like a ghost. Suddenly, a soft sound came from the hallway. She looked up quickly, wiping her face, afraid her daughter had woken. But it wasn't the child. It was him, the human. He stood in the doorway, not saying a word, just holding a blanket in one hand and a cup of something warm in the other. His eyes weren't wide with pity or awkward with discomfort. They were calm, heavy. Like he'd seen the same storm inside himself. Celiara looked away, ashamed. I didn't want you to see me like this, she said, voice rough. He walked forward slowly and placed the blanket beside her. You're allowed to feel, he said simply. You don't need permission. She didn't answer, her throat too tight. He sat down a few feet away, not close enough to scare her, not far enough to ignore her pain. I used to wake up at night too, he said softly, sweating, shaking, thinking I was still in that burning base. Her head turned slightly, eyes narrowing. You were a soldier. He nodded slowly. Not a good one, just one who survived. He looked toward the stars outside the window. I lost my squad on Epsilon Prime, every single one. I was the only one who crawled out. Celiara watched him, surprised he didn't speak like a hero. He spoke like someone who had carried a heavy burden for too long. That's why you bought us, she said quietly. Because you know how it feels to be the only one left. He gave a sad smile. No, I bought you because someone once saved me. And I couldn't forget that feeling. Celiara looked down, her voice shaking again. Sometimes I think it would have been better if I didn't survive. The words hung heavy in the air. The fire cracked, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then the man leaned forward, voice gentle. But your daughter. She's still alive because you did. Celiara blinked, her lips parting. He continued. She laughs, smiles, eats, sleeps, all because you fought to keep her breathing. A single tear fell again, this time not from pain, but from something warmer. She didn't know this man, didn't even know his name, but in that moment, he understood her better than anyone ever had. He stood up slowly and placed the cup in her hand. "Warm milk," he said, "helps with bad nights." Celiara took it with both hands, nodding silently. He turned to leave. But before stepping away, he paused and said, "You don't have to cry alone anymore." After he left, she sat there a while longer. Sipping the drink, her tears had stopped, her breath had slowed, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel ashamed of being broken. She got up quietly and returned to her daughter, lying down beside her. She wrapped her arms around the small body that meant the world to her. The girl stirred in her sleep and whispered, "Mama?" "I'm here," Celiara said, her voice gentle now. "I'm here, little one." And somewhere in the other room, the man with no name sat by the window, staring at the stars, remembering faces he had lost. But for once, he didn't feel alone either. The sun peeked through the clouds the next morning. Soft, golden light brushing across the shelter. Celiara stood outside near the garden, watching her daughter laugh as she chased a small insect. The sound of joy, her daughter's laughter, felt strange in her ears. Like a forgotten melody, for a moment, she let herself smile. Not out of habit, but from something real. Inside the shelter, the human was busy repairing a solar unit. He had removed his coat, wearing only a simple undershirt, his arms dirty with grease in his back turned toward the door. Celiara stepped inside quietly, holding 2 cups of warm herbal tea she had prepared. But as she reached the doorway, she froze. There it was, a long, dark scar across his back, jagged and deep. It looked like it came from fire or a plasma blade. The skin around it had healed unevenly, like it had once been torn apart and stitched back together in a hurry. She couldn't look away, her breath caught in her throat. This man. He was not just someone who survived the war, he had carried it on his skin. He turned suddenly. Catching her staring, she lowered her gaze, embarrassed, and held out the tea. "I brought this." He nodded, taking the cup. "Thank you, Celiara." Sat down near the window, sipping slowly. He didn't mention the scar. But the silence between them had changed. She finally asked, "Was it?" From the war, he looked down at his drink, fingers tight around the cup, then nodded. "Epsilon Prime. Last siege." She looked at him quietly, her voice soft. "You said you lost your squad there." He nodded again. "They got hit first. I tried to drag the last man out, but a plasma shell caught me from behind." He lifted his shirt slightly, showing the mark burned straight through my armor, nearly to the bone. Celiara winced. "How did you survive?" "I didn't," he replied with a bitter smile. "Not really. The man I was before died in that fire." She placed her cup down, her voice careful. "I know that feeling." He met her eyes, and this time, neither of them looked away. Celiara spoke softly, her words like threads slowly being stitched together. "When the soldiers came to my planet, they destroyed everything, my home, my family, my bondmate." She paused, swallowing pain. "He died trying to shield me and our daughter. They didn't care. They only wanted power." Her hands were trembling again. But this time, she didn't hide it. "They called me survivor, like it was something to be proud of. But all I felt was hollow." He said nothing at first, then gently replied, "That's the worst part. When everyone says you're lucky but you feel like a ghost." Celiara blinked, her lips parting slightly. Yes, that was exactly it. Being alive wasn't the same as living. The child ran into the room, her small arms holding a flower. "Mama, look," she said cheerfully. "I found this for the nice man." Celiara smiled, wiping her eyes quickly. "That's very kind, baby." The girl walked up to him and offered the tiny blue flower. He knelt, accepting it carefully like it was made of Glass, it's beautiful. Thank you. The girl grinned. Then ran back outside to play again. He stood up, placing the flower gently in a small glass cup. She has his eyes, he said, without looking up. Celiara blinked again, stunned. How? Did you? He turned toward her. I've seen that look before. In fathers who would give everything to protect their children, for a long moment, they stood in silence. Not strangers, not quite friends, but two broken souls, finally letting their walls down. Celiara walked to the corner, took a piece of cloth, and began helping him clean the tools. You don't have to, he said. I know, she replied. But I want to. They worked side by side for the rest of the morning, not needing to speak much. Each small motion felt like healing. Each glance felt like a step towards something better. Later, as they ate together, Celiara asked quietly, "What do people call you?" He paused, as if surprised by the question. Most just call me Stray, he said. Because I never stayed in one place? She nodded thoughtfully, then smiled gently. Well, Stray, thank you for not walking away from us. He looked at her and for the first time truly smiled, not just with his mouth, but with his eyes. And as the stars came out again that evening, the scar on his back remained, but now wasn't just a mark of pain. It was a reminder of survival, of kindness, of something quietly growing between two souls who once thought they were lost. The days had become quiet, almost too quiet. Celiara watered the garden every morning while her daughter chased insects under the glowing trees. Stray, the human, fixed small machines around the shelter, teaching the little girl how to twist wires and press the right buttons. It was peaceful, like a dream they all feared would vanish. But peace doesn't last forever, not in a galaxy filled with hunters and greed. And that morning, the sky cracked open. It started with a distant sound, low, sharp, unnatural. Stray heard it first, his body freezing like a soldier hearing an old war song. He stepped outside the shelter, scanning the sky. A small ship hovered just above the trees. Matte black with red markings, bounty symbols. He narrowed his eyes. Recognizing them instantly, "They found us," he muttered. Celiara stepped outside, holding her daughter's hand. "What's wrong?" Stray turned to her, voice sharp. "Inside?" Now, the girl looked up, confused. "Mama?" Celiara didn't ask questions. She grabbed her child and ran back inside. Stray opened a metal box buried beneath the floorboards. Inside, an old blaster, a combat knife, and a thin metal vest. He hadn't worn any of this since the last war, but he strapped it on now, fast and silent. 3 bounty hunters landed near the edge of the valley, large, armored, confident, carrying electric rods and plasma cuffs. One shouted, "We've come for the marked property. Hand them over, human." Stray stepped out slowly. Blaster low, but ready. "They're not property," the bounty hunter smirked. "Not your business." She was tagged for sale. No legal claim. Stray's jaw clenched. She's free. Another hunter raised his rod. "Then you'll both be slaves." They moved fast. But Stray moved faster, with a single step to the side. He fired one clean shot to the lead hunter's shoulder. The man dropped, screaming, electricity jumping from his broken weapon. The other 2 rushed forward. Stray ducked behind a broken wall. Pulling out a smoke charge from his vest, he tossed it, filling the air with gray fog. Inside the shelter, Celiara held her daughter close, her heart racing. She heard the shots, the screams, the clash of metal. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. All she could do was pray that the human who saved them once would survive again. Outside, Stray fought like a shadow, using every trick he had learned in his darkest days. He wasn't faster, he wasn't stronger, but he was smarter and more desperate. This wasn't about winning a war. This was about protecting something he never thought he'd have again. A home, a family. One of the bounty hunters slammed into him. Blade cutting across his arm, Stray grunted in pain, but used the moment to shove his knife into the alien's leg. The creature howled, falling backward. The last one tried to shoot him from behind, but before he could pull the trigger, a stone hit his hand. He looked up, shocked to see Celiara standing on the rooftop with another rock in her hand. She had tears in her eyes, but she didn't run. Stray used the distraction to strike. The fight ended in seconds. Bodies on the ground, breathing but broken. He limped towards Celiara, wiping blood from his face. "Why did you come out?" he asked. Voice raw, she stepped down and touched his arm. "Because you shouldn't have to fight alone." Inside, the little girl peeked out, running into Stray's arms. "You're hurt," she cried. Stray knelt and smiled gently. "Just a little scratch." That night, Celiara cleaned his wounds. Silent at first. Then she whispered, "You risked your life for us again. Why?" He looked at her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. "Because when I found you, I thought I was saving you," he said. "But I think you saved me." She didn't speak, but her hands moved slower, more gently, and when she wrapped the final bandage, she placed her hand on his. "You don't have to protect us alone anymore," she said. "We're with you now." Stray, he looked down at her hand. Alien, soft, scarred like his, and for the first time in years, he felt something stronger than pain. He felt needed. And as the stars blinked above their shelter once more, the sound of laughter returned. Quiet, tired, but real, they had survived again, together. The sky had turned soft, blue mixed with golden rays. Days passed quietly after the attack. No more ships came. No more hunters called their names. The valley healed, and so did the people in it. Stray now walked with a limp, a reminder of the fight he never asked for, but he smiled more now, even if only a little. Celiara noticed not just his limp, but the way his eyes followed her daughter as she played. And the way he always left 2 cups of tea on the table. One for himself, one for her. Celiara had changed too. She no longer jumped at every noise, no longer looked over her shoulder when she stepped outside. She began humming softly while preparing meals, combing her daughter's hair, even planting more herbs by the door. One evening, after her daughter had fallen asleep beside a half-finished drawing, Celiara stepped outside and found Stray sitting under a tree. The moonlight wrapped around him like silver cloth. And for a moment, she just watched him. He heard her footsteps, but didn't turn. "You always sit here after dark," she said, settling beside him. He nodded. "It's quiet. Helps me think." They sat in silence for a while, the air filled with the sound of night insects. Then she whispered, "Do you think they'll come back?" Stray's fingers curled around a small stone. "Maybe," he said, "but next time I won't be alone." She turned to look at him, her voice low. "I was useless during the fight." He met her eyes. "You threw a rock at a bounty hunter, Celiara." She laughed softly, a real laugh. "It wasn't even a big rock," he smiled back. "It saved my life." The wind brushed past them gently. Then she said, "I never thought I'd feel safe again." "You are safe now," he said, his voice sure, and "I never thought I'd feel anything again," she added quietly. Stray didn't answer with words. He just looked at her, long and slow. That gaze made her heart beat faster, not with fear, not with doubt, but with warmth. "I didn't come here to love anyone," she whispered. "I didn't either." He replied, his voice almost a breath. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. It was a small touch, light as air, but it meant everything. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, her eyes shining with held-back tears. "You're not?" He said without hesitation, "You're home." Their fingers locked gently. And they sat there, together, under stars that had once watched them suffer, now watching them heal. The next morning, things felt different, not strange, but more connected. Stray poured tea and placed it beside her without asking. She touched his shoulder lightly when walking past. The child noticed, too. "Are we a family now?" she asked, blinking up at them with big, hopeful eyes. Celiara bent down, brushing the girl's hair back. "Would you like that?" The girl nodded. "Yes, because no one leaves in a family." Stray knelt beside her. "Then, I guess we're a family." They started building a second room, one with softer walls and a stronger roof. Stray let the little girl paint the door with her finger drawings. He and Celiara worked side by side, their hands brushing often, their laughter mixing like music at night. Celiara sat by the window, sewing warm clothes. Stray read old star maps, teaching the girl names of constellations. One evening, the girl climbed into his lap and said, "Can I call you Papa?" Stray froze, his eyes wide. Celiara watched him from across the room. Holding her breath, he looked down at the girl, smiled, and said, "If that's what you want." The girl hugged him tightly. "I want that more than anything." Celiara wiped her tears, not of sadness, but of something she hadn't felt since her bondmate's death. Hope later, as they stood outside under the stars again. She whispered, "We were just surviving before, now we're living." Stray looked at her, his hand finding hers without a word. "You saved me the day I met you," she said. "Not with weapons, not with shelter, with kindness." He leaned closer, forehead resting gently against hers. "We saved each other," he said. The moon rose, and in that quiet place among forgotten stars, something beautiful took root, not forced, not rushed, not expected, but real. The bond that formed between them wasn't written in law or blood. It was written in every small moment, in every shared cup of tea. Every look, every breath, they had become more than survivors. They had become something whole, together. The city hadn't changed. Same broken roads, same metal towers, same cold stairs. But something had changed. The ones walking back into it. Stray walked tall, coat flapping in the wind. His eyes calm and steady. Beside him was Celiara, her face no longer bowed, her head lifted. She wore soft leathers now, stitched by her own hands. And holding her hand tightly was her daughter, smiling, brave, no longer afraid of the crowds. They walked through the market square, past traders, soldiers, workers, and watchers. People turned their heads, whispers rising like dust. "That's her. The widow from the auction. And that human. He bought her, right?" Thought they were worthless, but the whispers didn't sting anymore. Because they weren't the same people anymore. They walked toward a building with tall, rusted doors. The auction house, the same place where Celiara and her daughter were once called property, the same place Stray had stood alone. Now, they stood together. Inside, the lights flickered. Voices called out names, numbers, prices, new faces, same evil. Stray walked down the aisle slowly, his boots echoing on the metal floor. At the front, a young alien girl stood trembling, chained beside a week-old woman, the auctioneer shouted. 2 for 1. Strong backs, clean, barely broken. Before anyone could raise a hand, Stray's voice cut through the room. "No more?" The auctioneer stopped, confused. "What?" Stray stepped forward, tossing down a bag of credits. "I'm not here to buy," he said. "I'm here." To shut this down, Celiara followed him to the front. Her eyes sharp, she turned to the crowd, her voice clear. "I was once up here, just like them. They called me worthless." She lifted her daughter's hand. "But someone believed we were more, and now we're free." A few buyers shifted nervously. Others watched silently. Stray looked at the frightened girl on the platform and nodded. To the guard, "Let her go." The guard hesitated, then obeyed. One by one, they began unchaining the others. Some cried, some couldn't even move. "We've bought this hall," Stray announced. "This place now belongs to no one." And everyone, Celiara stepped forward, placing her hand on the child's shoulder. "You're safe now," she said, and the girl collapsed into her arms, sobbing over the next hours. They helped every single slave out of that building, stray. Called in others, old allies, quiet rebels, forgotten soldiers. All tired of watching cruelty win, they cleaned the rooms, broke the cages, smashed the price boards off the walls. By sunset, the auction house was gone, and in its place stood something new, a shelter, a sanctuary, a school, not just for the rescued, but for anyone lost, anyone broken. Saliara taught the young ones how to grow food, how to read, how to speak with strength. Stray trained others to defend, to protect, to stand tall even when afraid. One day, a reporter from the outer colonies arrived, curious. She asked Stray, "Why did you do all this?" He looked at Saliara and their daughter playing under the garden trees. Then he replied, "Because someone called them worthless once, and were they?" The reporter asked. He smiled, shaking his head. They were everything. Word spread. Other worlds began shutting down auctions. Inspired by what started here, Saliara's name became a symbol, not of pain, but of power born from love. She often stood outside the shelter at night, her daughter asleep inside. Stray always joined her, his arm brushing hers. She would whisper, "Do you still think you're just a stray?" And he'd say, "Not anymore. I have a place now. I have you." Their bond wasn't written on paper or declared to crowds. It was quiet, but strong like stone. A bond built not from words, but from staying, from saving, from choosing each other every single day, and for those who once watched them stand forgotten on a stage. They now watched with wonder as the ones called worthless became the ones the galaxy needed. Not warriors, not rulers, but builders of something better, together.